Good day everyone, I am Christopher Opahela, and today I am with Miss Meryl Viejo, Miss Cherime Viloria, and Miss Margine Combate to discuss to you the Kants and Rights theories. To start with, let us first know who Kant is. So, Kant or Immanuel Kant is born on April 22, 1724 at Königsberg, Prussia, now called Kaliningrad, Russia. He is a German philosopher whose work on epistemology and ethics greatly influenced philosophy and several idealism and Kantianism ways of thinking. One of his works that have influenced idealism is through his work in the Critique of Pure Reason. With that being said, let us now move on to Kant's ethical theory. Kant's ethical theory represents deontological ethics. The word theon means duty in Greek. Deontological theory judges actions to be right or wrong based on whether they conform with our duties. Moreover, a right action, according to him, is one that is controlled and justified by a law or theory. In Kant's ethical theory, it was the rational and autonomous conformity of one's will to see right, the universal moral law. In other words, it is a person's choice to see our rights logically as a universal moral law. Kant's theory is the foundation of metaphysics of morals, wherein it is said that Kant established metaphysics of morals based on the idea that rationality drives morality. And lastly, it also explains the philosophical foundation of morality and moral action. Now that I introduced you with Immanuel Kant and gave an introduction to his ethical theory, let's now have Miss Meryl Viejo to discuss to you the Kant's concepts of morality, and later on, Miss Cherry Viloria and Miss Margine Combate to discuss about moral actions.
Let's move on to Kant's concept. And according to Kant, there are three types of morality, and those are the goodwill, the notion of duty, and the nature of imperatives. So let's tackle first what is goodwill.
To explain what a goodwill is, it is necessary to explain that what Kant meant by good and what he meant by will. Good, first, is a practical concept. This means that it has a necessary relation to action. And will refers to what is called the mental faculty engaged in the practical stance. It differs from understanding and feeling. The faculties engaged for the other stances. This will is our general ability for causing something to happen intentionally. When we think of goodwill, a will that is morally good, we refer to this ability as it is guided by our thought of the morality of what we are doing. According to Kant, only thing that is good is without qualification. So let's move on to the notion of duty. Notion of duty is the distinction between what I want and what I ought. Considering only those actions that are seemingly good according to Kant are actions that seem good by duty, that are good to my common sense of duty, and for that they are right. Moral actions are not spontaneous.
So let's move on to nature of imperatives. Imperatives means they are commands. And according to Kant, there are two types of nature of imperatives, and those are hypothetical imperatives and the categorical imperatives. So let's explain first what is hypothetical imperatives. Hypothetical imperatives are the commands that you should follow if you want something, and most of the time, whether or not we ought to do something isn't really a moral choice, but instead it's just a contingent of our desires. For example, if your desire is to get a money, then you ought to get a job. It means that if you want, you ought, and the ought or the duty is conditioned by our desires, wants, and goals, and it is grounded in self-interest. But hypothetical imperative is about prudence rather than morality.
For example, if you don't want to get money, then don't work. If you don't want to work, then don't go. That's simple. Categorical imperative is the form of imperative contrasting with the hypothetical imperatives, and it is the categorical imperative. This type of imperative purports to be true, or as it is sometimes said, valid, apart from any presupposed end or purpose to achieve by acting as it commands. If a categorical is valid, then it is valid universally for everyone, regardless of his or her private ends. To Kant's way of thinking, moral requirements can be expressed only in categorical imperatives. We ought to obey moral requirements regardless of our personal projects or of what we may most convenient for us. The first formulation is the universalizability principle, and it states that act as if the maxim of your action were to secure through your will a universal law of nature. Kant states that a true moral proposition must be tied to any particular conditions, including the identity of the person making decision. A moral maxim must be disconnected from the particular physical details surrounding its proposition, and it should be applicable to any rational being. According to Kant, we first have the perfect duty not to act by the maxims that result in logical contradiction. Second, we have imperfect duties, which are still based on pure reason. First formulation of the categorical imperative appears similar to the golden rule. Do not do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Kant's first categorical imperative sounds like a paraphrase of the golden rule. However, the golden rule is neither purely formal nor universally binding. It is empirical, that in the sense that applying it requires context. For example, if you don't want others to hit you, then don't hit them. Also, it is hypothetical imperative in the sense that it can be formulated at if-then relationship is open to dispute. The second formulation is the formula of humanity, and it says that act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or that of another, always as an end and never as a mean. What Kant conveys to the formula of humanity is that it is at least as foolish to treat humanity as a means for attaining any other end. When he refers to humanity as an end itself, he means that every other end is valuable because of its relation to humanity. This includes happiness. Consequently, it is foolish or unreasonable to treat humanity as a mere means to anything else, including happiness, but more than that, it is morally wrong. If the validity of the categorical imperatives depend on humanity's existing as an end in itself, as it does according to Kant's moral realism, then the categorical imperative should forbid any action that treats humanity merely as a means.
Intrinsic goodness. Kant claims that the only good without classification is the good will. He treats the good will as the highest good, since its end will always be good. It is also a condition of all other goods. Other matters such as fortune, power, intelligence, or other traditional virtues are not enjoying the status of highest good, since they can be used by rational beings for bad ends. Thus, it is motivated by duty, so when we act from duty, we exhibit the good will. Example of intrinsic goodness: happiness, truth, and life. Free will. Free will is the idea that we are able to have some choice on how we act and assumes that we are free to choose our behavior. In other words, we are self-determined. Thus, Kant famously remarks, "A free will and a will under a moral laws is one and the same. For as we said before, to be free is just to act in accordance with the moral law." For example, people can make a free choice as to whether to commit a crime or not, unless they are a child or they are insane. Synthetic a priori. Synthetic a priori knowledge is central to the thought of Immanuel Kant, who argued that some such a priori concepts are presupposed by the very possibility of experience. Though a little has been written on this topic, a correct understanding of this claim is important to understanding Kant's view. Kant describes synthetic a priori proposition as ones that express a necessary relationship between two distinct concepts. The usual example of this is, nothing can be simultaneously red and green all over. 7 plus 5 is equal to 12.
Or any other basic arithmetic statements.
Moral worth. A person's actions determine her moral worth, meaning to say that the action of a person is based on what is right and wrong. A person is morally worthy or lacks moral worth. An example for this is the morally based. A person's actions determine her moral worth, but there is more to this than merely seeing if the actions are right or wrong. Taking in account these aspects: the background, basic idea, motivation, consequences, and interpretation. On basic idea, Kant argues that a person is good or bad depending on the motivation of their actions and on the goodness of the consequences of those actions. Next is motivation. By means of motivation, it is a desire to accomplish something. For example, imagine that I win the lottery and I'm wondering what to do with that money. So I look around for what would be the most fun to do with it. Buy expensive clothes, shoes, bags, travel in first class around the world, or etc. I decided that what would be really fun is to give the money to charity and enjoy that special feeling you get from making people happy. So I give all my lottery money to people who are in need. But according to Kant, I am not a morally worthy person because I did this. After all, I just did whatever I thought would be the most fun, and there is nothing admirable about such a selfish pursuit. Moral worth only comes when you do not something because you know that it is your duty and you would do it regardless of whether you like it. That is why motivation is what matters. Next is consequences. Consequence is something that logically or naturally follow from an action or condition, or in a simple word, a consequence comes after or as a result of something you do. For example, imagine two people out together drinking at a bar late one night, and each of them decides to drive home very drunk. They drive in different directions through the middle of nowhere. One of them encounters no one on the road, and so gets home without incident regardless of totally reckless driving. The other drunk is not so lucky and encounters someone walking at night and kills the pedestrian with the car. Kant argues that based on these actions, both drunks are equally bad, and the fact that one person got totally lucky does not make them any better than the same choices, and nothing within either one's control had anything to do with the difference in their actions. The same reasoning applies to people who act for the reasons. If both people who act for the right persons, then both are morally worthy, even if the actions of one of them happen to lead to bad consequences by bad luck. So that is why consequences don't matter. Next is interpretation. Interpretation is the act of explaining, reframing, or otherwise showing your own understanding of something. One can have moral worth only if one is motivated by morality. In this statement, Kant argues that each of us has its own moral worth, and one can have moral worth only if one is motivated by morality. In law, a man is guilty when he violates the rights of others. In ethics, he is guilty if he only thinks of doing so. This statement is critically examined by Immanuel Kant. This makes a distinction between ethics and law. Laws are externally enforced upon a society and deter potential crime. Ethics, on the other hand, serve to guide individual conscience by enabling people to separate right from wrong. For example, a person who thinks about killing another person is not guilty in law, as he does not deprive the other person of his right to life. However, simply by harboring thoughts of murder, he is ethnically guilty. Similarly, men who think of violating a woman's dignity are guilty from an ethical point of view, even though they may not be considered legally guilty until they actually perform that act. On the other hand, Kant's statement of this may not always hold the true, as ethics reflects the society's mindset, which changes with time. We may now proceed to respect. Respect has great importance in everyday life. As children, we are taught to respect our parents, teachers, and elders, school rules and traffic laws, family and cultural traditions, other people's feelings and rights, our country's flag and leaders, the truth and people differing opinions. But respect, according to Kant, is the acknowledgement in attitude and conduct of the dignity of persons as ends in themselves. Kant brought the notion of respect to the center of moral philosophy for the first time. Central to Kant's ethical theory is the claim that all persons are owed respect just because they are persons, that is, free rational beings. Respect for such beings is not only appropriate but also morally and unconditionally required. The status and worth of persons is such that they must always be respected. Next, the proper object of respect is the will. Respecting a person involves issues related to the will, knowledge, and freedom. In this statement, it means that the respect for a person is one of the fundamental principles. It is the recognition of a person as an autonomous, unique, and free individual. It also means that we recognize that each person has the right and capacity to make her or his decisions. Respecting a person ensures that dignity is valued, which also involves issues related to the will, knowledge, as well as freedom. Next, Kant sees people as an autonomous earning that they give themselves their own laws. Kant sees people as an enormous or free, in the sense of being the author of the law that binds it. Next, as a person has its own laws, the disrespect of their laws is not acceptable in their code, meaning to say that each person has its own rules. That is why people can do whatever they want. It is because they have the authority or rights as well as of having their own rules. But disrespect of the laws will never be acceptable.